Hey G7, this is the global gender gap. Did you know that it will take us another 135 years to bridge it? That the pandemic has set us back by a generation in closing this gap? That marginalized women and girls in the global south are most vulnerable to the impacts of the climate crisis, even though they have contributed the least to the problem? We need to turn this phase of crisis into a phase of change. This phase of change needs all of our faces, all of our voices, and we are ready to face it. So, are you ready? We are the W7, a joint force of representatives of gender equality organizations and advocacy groups. Our goal is to bring gender justice into focus within the G7. Our demands will be poured into a final declaration, and we hand it over to the presidency. So join us and become a face of change. For more than 45 years, the G7 has represented an informal forum of the formerly most powerful economic nations of the global north. The G7 is not just this one summit, it is a long process with an influential outcome, the G7 communique. So let's face it, women in all their diversity need to be wherever decisions are being made. Represented. Together, we create a gender equitable way out of the crisis. W7, time to face the change, time to bridge the gap and get over it.
Indeed, it's time to deliver. So a very, very warm welcome from Berlin-Kreuzberg to all over the world. So we're here with some of the W7 advisors in the room, and they are going to make some noise so they can hear them. Thank you so much, because it's good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're joining in from. We are very proud that you're taking your time to be with us today. My name is Juliane Rosin. I'm the head of international affairs at Deutscher Frauenrat, which translates into the National Council of German Women's Organization. And they are very, very proudly hosting the W7 this year. And we are really excited because today the Chancellor and the G7 President, Olaf Scholz, will join us and we'll hand over our recommendations to him, the outcome of a very intense process for several months. And I assume you're also very keen on reading what we came up with, so no worries. Just join us on our website, w7.org. There you find everything you need, our communique, the implementation plan, but also information on our speakers and the schedule for today. So, but this is not the only place you shall visit. Just engage with us on social media. You can find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and obviously Twitter, just at W7Official. And please use the hashtags W7 Summit 2022, but you also can use the hashtag Time to Deliver. And last but never least, you're joining us through our website, and there you can see there's a chance to chat with us and engage with us. And we have a very first question we want your answer to. What do you think is the most important thing right now to achieve gender justice? So what's the most important thing to achieve gender justice? Please give us your quick and short answer, just 1 to 3 words, and we'll take a look at it later during the day and show you the results. So, just some final remarks. The most part of the program will be in English today, but the Chancellor himself will speak and answer our questions in German and give his speech in German. But no worries, there's a chance to click somewhere behind around the screen, and there you can change the languages from English to German and the other way around. And as I said, you are very welcome to engage with us and post your questions and comments, especially during the panel. You have a chance to also vote on questions someone else put there. So, and we take all the questions very seriously. Just might be possible because we're very tight on time that we don't manage to answer all of those. But so please vote on the questions so we know what's the most important thing for you to know. And well, the good audience already realized that someone's sitting just behind me, so I will join her. Let me introduce Diana Sarosi. She is working at Oxfam as a Director of Policy and Campaigns. And you're sitting here because you're based in Canada. and Canada was hosting the very first ever W7 summit back in 2018. Yes, and we met there. So I assume we learned a lot during this very special time for you. So is there anything you want to exchange with us about your experience?
Yeah, thank you. It was indeed a very exciting time. I think the Canadian presidency really set a new precedent in terms of addressing gender equality within the G7. They created the Gender Advisory Council. They mainstreamed gender throughout. And yeah, lessons that we learned from that is it is important to engage with the GIAC. And, you know, it's sad to hear that it's been kind of late on the German front with the GIAC being established. And that's one of the things I'm looking forward to hearing from the Chancellor later about. But also it's important to go with priorities that the government has set, right? Like you get the most momentum on the issues that the government wants to move forward to. So in this context this year, we know that care is really important for the German presidency, and they have prioritized it. They're very active in the Global Alliance on Care, right? So use that as an opportunity to really push forward really great progress on that. Feminist foreign policy is another one, for example. And then also the ministerials are very important avenues for influencing. We're sort of focused on the leaders track, right? But there are all these ministerials where I think it's much easier to get voices into those spaces from civil society and really push for civil society to be part of the agenda, right? And then, yeah, advocacy really needs to happen at all G7 country levels, right? They all need to agree for something to move forward. So it's really important that, the activists really focus on their own countries during that time.
Yeah, I think the video in the beginning just pointed out this as well, because most people believe it's just a 2 days event, right? And all the decisions are just being made there. And yeah, it's a bunch of negotiations, and we as civil society need to organize ourselves. And then we need to be ready to present our recommendations in all those tracks, but we need to organize ourselves. And this is what I think W7 does quite well at the moment.
Exactly.
But your impression from yesterday, what do you take with you?
I think one highlight for me was the speech by Lisa Paus, and especially when she mentioned that feminism is the antidote to authoritarianism, right? And that's really great to hear. But it's not really clear to me yet whether governments understand that it's women's rights organizations that are making that change, that are organizing, that are, really sustaining these gains. And I think often that's not quite clear to governments. And, this has been studied. There's evidence behind it. And because it's not quite clear to them, there's just not enough support for women's rights organizations. The resources have been very tight, and especially throughout the pandemic, a lot of resources have gone to multilateral bodies like the UN, COVAX, and so on, right? And with ODA not increasing, that means, once again, women's rights organizations are the last ones to receive resources. So, yeah, I think it's really important that we bring that message very clearly to them. And then the other thing that always strikes me is the governments say the right thing, right? They're saying the same things as us in many cases, right? But when it really comes to putting that into action, that's where sort of the gap is. So really focusing on implementation of what they're promising. We have the laws, we have the policies, but also really thinking through what's a feminist approach to policy making, and that really means working again with women's rights organizations. Often it's consultation, but I would say, no, let's make it collaboration, right? And and work together in getting these things implemented because it takes that, engagement on all levels. And then what's also struck me is sort of, we're at a very interesting time in history where we're experiencing one crisis after another, and that's not going to go away. It's probably going to get worse. And so with governments sort of constantly wrapped up in the urgent things, the important things don't happen. And so a lot of the things that we're sort of working on are the important things, right? Like it was really great to hear yesterday that the German government wants to have a feminist development assistance policy, right? But again, development assistance is seen as important, not urgent. And so really making sure there are resources, capacity to keep those important things moving forward, I think is going to be a real challenge for all of us. We've heard this G7 is very much preoccupied with the war in the Ukraine. Obviously, it needs to be. It's a terrible situation. But again, there are important things that also need to move forward. So keeping an eye on that.
Yes, not just to add the cherry on top, but keeping the system alive.
Exactly.
I mean, using the term feminist development policy, feminist foreign policy, it's about transforming something to really change something, just starting with the roots. And, well, at least it's promising they're changing the words, and we'll keep on watching them, right?
Yes.
So what are you looking forward today?
Well, I'm obviously really looking forward to the speech by the Chancellor. It's exciting that he's here today and wants to listen to us. As I mentioned, I'm very keen to hear more about what he envisions for the GIAC. But then also, I'm always interested to hear, what are some of the challenges they're facing in moving forward progressive feminist policy. So hopefully in the questions we get some of that as well.
We will definitely listen very carefully. And we start listening to the recommendations of the W7 once again, because we have our next panel, the third panel of the summit, just coming up. And it's about ending gender violence as a prerequisite for feminist foreign policy. It will be moderated by my dear colleague, Madita Stanke-Erdmann. But prior to that, here you have the voices of the W7. Thank you so much.
Hi G7.
Violence against women and girls and gender-based violence are human rights violations.
They are both cause and consequence of gender inequality, and they undermine all other efforts aimed at women's participation and empowerment.
We, W7 advisors, thus call on the G7 to commit sufficient financing and funding for GBV prevention, response, and protection.
And enable quality prevention that is accessible to women and girls in all their diversity in conflict and crisis-affected regions.
To ensure solid commitment and investment in promoting sexual and reproductive health and rights, and increased access to contraception and safe abortion services, both in their countries and overseas.
To commit to eradicating female genital mutilation, forced and child marriage.
Dedicate 25% of GBV funding to women's rights organizations and feminist movements.
Gender inequality and unequal power relations are central obstacles to sustainable peace.
We call for a foreign policy that dismantles patriarchal, colonial, and racist power structures.
We call for a radical shift in foreign policy towards a feminist foreign policy, where decisions are based on participation, inclusion, and a human rights-based approach.
We, the W7 advisors, call on the G7 to implement a feminist foreign and development policy in all G7 states.
Promote and improve the rights of women, LGBTQIA+ people, indigenous communities, BIPOC people, people with disabilities, the youth and elders at all levels.
Decrease the military funding and increase the funding of feminist women's NGOs.
And to put gender equality in the center of programs funded by the official development assistance.
And also, we request you eliminate all norms and activities that persecute and criminalize women's rights defenders worldwide.
So, G7 leaders, are you ready? It is time to deliver.
Are you ready?
It's time to deliver.
It is time to deliver.
Thank you very much, Juliana, for handing over to us. I think these incredibly powerful messages from W7 activists present a fantastic start to the discussion today on the future of ending gender-based violence and putting a feminist foreign policy on the table. Before I introduce you, the distinguished panel, to our audience, just a quick reminder for our audience online that I have this lovely iPad here where you can send questions to if you have them, and we'll feed them into our discussion later on. And since we're running on a tight schedule, I hope that we will have the chance to talk as much and discuss as much as we can today about this really pressing issue. But before I introduce everyone, let's take a moment to think about why it is so crucial to have this debate today, here, and now. First of all, last week, the Netherlands announced plans to adopt a feminist foreign policy, joining a group of states that have already announced to adopt one. And without a doubt, this is a really exciting moment for the transnational feminist movement. And it gives hope to a more holistic practice of foreign and security policy that is human rights-based, that is inclusive and participatory. However, this news comes at a time of multiple and persisting crises, but also emerging global and intersecting crises. And we spoke about the gendered effects of the pandemic and the climate crisis yesterday already. And these link undoubtedly to the war in and against Ukraine, the global food and nutrition crisis, and the sovereign debt crisis in the so-called global south. And looking at some examples, almost a year ago, we witnessed how the so-called Western allied forces withdrew from Afghanistan with no strategy or lack of support for staff who worked for international and national organizations, resulting in life-threatening consequences, particularly for women and girls and marginalized groups in the country. At the same time, what we're also witnessing is the strengthening of anti-rights and anti-gender and gender backlash movement with violent consequences for women, girls, and LGBTIQ all over the world, and this includes G7 states. So these crises really make visible that the ancient feminist concept of the continuum of violence remains painfully valid. Gender-based violence is not only an issue in militarized conflict, where, for instance, rape is used systematically as a weapon of war. Violence permeates societies. It is inherent to and reinforces structural, that is, racialized, gendered, and class global inequalities. And as current crises show, these inequalities condense in unequal access to political and economic participation, education, or land. We've known for a long time that how foreign policy is practiced actually shapes and affects the everyday lives of people, and it disproportionately does so to historically marginalized groups such as women, girls, LGBTIQ, and BIPOC. And it's becoming increasingly frustrating that these members of society are largely excluded from decision-making processes and inner circles of foreign policy, even though inclusive instruments for more peaceful and gender-just societies exist. So this calls for many things. It calls for a change in foreign policy and in security policy. It calls on leaders to listen to civil society, activists, and women-led NGOs who have the knowledge and experience. And this is one of the reasons why the W7 network has gathered to formulate concrete demands to implement a feminist foreign policy and to push for measures that end gender-based violence. And this is why we're here today. So before we engage in the discussion, I'd like to introduce our panelists to the audience in the room and online. So first of all, a warm welcome to who's joining us today. Sanam Naragi Andalini, MBE, the founder and CEO of the International Civil Society Action Network, ICANN, and director of the Center for Women, Peace and Security at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Thank you so much for being here, Sanam. You co-authored the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 in 2000, so it's been a while, and have been acting as a hinge between civil society, academia, and policy, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's indeed a privilege to be with you.
Thank you. Next, Nahida Halimi, you're a founder of We the Women, and editor of a collection of essays portraying Afghan women, experts in their stories of struggle and hope in Afghanistan. But you're also an artist, a filmmaker, a producer, and have been active in making Afghan women's voices heard and visible in the world for so many years. And we're so happy that you're here today with us. Next to my left is Spogme Ahmed. You're a senior global policy advocate for the International Center on Research on Women. And Spogme, you're an expert in multilateral bodies, such as the G7, and also one of our W7 advisors, on feminist foreign policy. And we're really grateful to have you here today in Berlin. And last but not least, we also have Minister of State for Europe and Climate, Dr. Anna Lührmann, who is not here yet. She's at the Federal Foreign Office and should be joining us in a minute, actually, as the representative of the German government and the German G7 presidency. And we hope that she'll be here any minute. Right. And last but not least, Fumi Saito, who will wrap up the panel later on. We'll get you on stage in a minute. Great. Now, the title of today's panel has kind of twofold feminist vision, right? First, it reminds us that ending GBV calls for nothing but to structurally change our societies and to overcome their patriarchal and often neo-colonial underbelly. And second, it puts forward that a true feminist foreign policy can only be implemented if we achieve such groundbreaking societal change on a global and local level. And this is why I'd like to start a first round of discussion about where we stand globally in our endeavors to reach this utopia. So, Spogme, the W7 called for an implementation of a feminist foreign policy in all G7 states. And could you just give us a brief overview of what core principles a feminist foreign policy entail and how the W7 actually suggests that these can help address the multiple crises that we're facing?
Sure. Thank you so much, Medita, for the question and the opportunity to be here with you all today. It's been such a rewarding process being part of the W7, and I'm so excited to get to join you all in Berlin. And to speak about one of my favorite topics, of feminist foreign policy. So I think you've laid it out really well in your opening as well. Feminist foreign policy is a comprehensive approach to foreign policy that prioritizes peace, gender equality, and environmental integrity. And it seeks to redress the wrongs of the past by charting forward a pathway that is more productive, iterative, and inclusive. It aims to disrupt oppressive systems and structures that are holding back progress by centering the human rights of women and girls. So on the core principles of feminist foreign policy, I'll name about 7 or so, but it's a non-exhaustive list, as I'm sure that many more will emerge throughout the course of this conversation and the rest of the agenda today. So first and foremost, feminist foreign policy should centralize a focus on rights, recognizing that women's rights are human rights and the need to be unapologetic in that stance. It should also be representative, inclusive, and responsible to stakeholders, meaning as states are developing a feminist foreign policy, they should prioritize consultation with feminist movements and civil society, including and particularly with indigenous and marginalized communities, which are often left out of traditional policy making. Thirdly, embracing intersectionality, which I'm glad has been a theme throughout the W7 summit, as foundational to analysis and implementation, recognizing the differential power structures that exist and the effects that they have on women of various and overlapping identities. Another major theme is resources, of course. So feminist foreign policy is not just words on paper. We want to see a % increase in domestic and foreign budgets to gender equality. So as the W7, we've been calling for 100% of official development assistance to address gender equality, and for at least 20% of those funds to specifically target gender equality as a main objective. And we want to ensure that funds are flowing to the right places. So not towards increased militarization and war, but towards social services and positive reforms that are protecting and advancing human rights. I'll make also a point about accountability. So in feminist foreign policy, we want to see time-bound and measurable commitments, making sure that it's possible to monitor and evaluate what states are committing to, and making sure that we have a means of understanding progress, making sure that it's being successful, finding ways to fill gaps in progress and continue to chart our way forward. I'll also point out what ICRW and our partners call REACH, or comprehensiveness, which means that any principles that are taken up in foreign policy should also be taken up in domestic policy, and that feminist foreign policy is not just about one facet of foreign policy, but it should be mainstreamed and included throughout several thematic priorities. So that means aid, development assistance, trade, security, climate change, disaster response, health, finance, pursuing an all-inclusive rights-based approach to policymaking. And the last point I'll make is that feminist foreign policy should really be evolutionary and transformative, recognizing that process is really one of the most important parts. Feminist foreign policy is a strategy to ensure that we're always improving and correcting our wrongs and allowing ourselves the flexibility to remain productive and nimble. So all of these things should really help in addressing the multiple crises that the world is facing today, as feminist foreign policy urges countries, particularly those in the global north, to understand their positionality in the world and to recompense for past faults so that we don't make the same mistakes in the future.
Great. Thank you so much, Bagme, for setting the stage once again. And we now have Minister of State Anna Luhrmann here with us. Thank you so much for coming. Hi.
Oh, sorry for the delay. We had
No
a
worries.
cabinet meeting, so yeah.
All good, all good. Thank you so much for coming. We're really delighted to have you. So we kind of started the first round of discussion. So if you don't mind, we'll just continue. Great. Sanam, the next question I would like to direct to you. You have gained a tremendous amount of experience in policy and research on the Women, Peace and Security agenda, to which ending GBV is in militarized conflict and wars is a core issue. So with the WPS agenda turning 22 years this year, actually, where do you see the main challenges in implementing a feminist foreign policy?
Thank you. I'm sorry not to be with you in person, but thank you for having me online. I wanted to add to the comments of my colleague who was just talking about the concept of feminine foreign policy. And if we situate it in the work that we've done so far, so 22 years ago, it was a global campaign that came from women in war zones saying we need the Security Council to acknowledge women's experiences in war, not only in terms of what happens to them as victims and survivors of conflict, but also in terms of their agency and how they're engaged in peacemaking and in conflict prevention, and also in terms of the needs of, say, women who were in fighting forces and so forth. So there is an element going back 22 years that we were saying it's really important to think about the people on the ground. And it's really important to consider gender responsiveness. So when we say, how do our policies have taken into consideration the needs of women and girls? It's really simple in many ways. It's saying you're providing humanitarian aid. What does that look like? If you have to provide health and shelter to refugees and displaced persons, have you understood or have you taken into consideration the different needs of women and girls versus men and boys? It's been 22 years that we've been saying simple things, sanitary products, healthcare. It's not rocket science, but we have institutional blocks that are happening. Our humanitarian agencies, which governments have brought all of the humanitarian agencies that receive government funding to provide humanitarian aid, whether it's the UN system or international organizations, and said to them, you do strategies and practice of hunger prevention, you provide shelter. Well, why not sexual violence prevention in humanitarian settings? It's up to them. That responsibility to think about it is there. We have practices, but it's not being done. So 22 years since the adoption of the WPS agenda, which is in a way the precursor to this idea of feminist foreign policy, we are really at a point where we have to say, what's it going to take? We asked for reduction in military expenditure. We now have over $2 trillion this year being spent on weaponry, right? We've just seen another shooting in the United States of kids, with an AR-15. The idea that violence is acceptable and peace or dialogue and negotiations is seen as weak needs to shift as well. So it's the whole, it is a transformative agenda. It is very much what I call transformative equality, because it's not that our agenda is not simply that we want peace for women and we don't care about the men. It's really saying we don't want our boys or our men to be going off to fight and be traumatized and maim and kill and so forth. It's really about putting violence as the very last option of everything, and hopefully not an option. Every act of violence is a choice that somebody is making. It's not inevitable. It is not necessarily, the essence of human nature, actually, because if you look at the world, even in war zones, underneath that layer of violence that the media reports on, people are trying to live their lives. And we're in a state right now where we have to ask ourselves, why is it that world war has not only been possible, but we're also thinking about it as being probable again. But the idea of world peace, which is what 99.99% of the world's population actually want and thrive in, and our businesses and our lives and so forth need, why is that perceived to be naive in some sort of way? Why is that such, as you said, utopian? It shouldn't be utopian. That should be the norm. And it really comes down to this question of, where are we spending our money? Why were we asleep at the wheel on what was going on between Russia and Ukraine from 2008 to 2014, so that now we have a war and now we're throwing so much money and weaponry and so forth at it? Where was the really intense diplomacy around that? And what's the next conflict that we should be preventing now? Because in the last 20 years that I've been in this work, over 25 years, our governments and our international system has been extraordinarily good at starting wars and being trigger happy. We have been extraordinarily bad at ending wars and fostering peace and preventing wars. And it's now gotten to the point where the public understands this. And so this idea of a feminist perspective and what the women say and what the women are doing and how we perceive these things and how inclusive our practices are, it's tested, it's researched, we know it works. It's just a question of getting it done right now. And as you said, it's about putting resources into the work of women's movements, but it's also about bringing women peace builders to the spaces and tables where these decisions are being made, and heeding their voice, not just saying, oh, we had somebody and they came to the Security Council and spoke and how wonderful they were, but genuinely heeding their voices. And I'll end with this, and I'm very glad we have an Afghan colleague. If Afghan women peace builders had been in Doha throughout the negotiations, Afghanistan would not be in the state that it's in right now. And the challenges that Afghanistan and Afghan women are facing is not only in Afghanistan, because it's given resurgence to radicalization and extremism across the world. And every extremist movement we see, whether it's the ones who claim Islam or white supremacy or Hindu extremism, all of them have misogyny and the coercion of women at the heart of them. So we're in a very, very difficult stage right now. And we have a lot of answers. And as you said, it's a question of whether our governments are willing to deliver now under the auspices of feminist foreign policy. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So given our tight schedule that we're running on, I'm going to just pass over to you, Nahid. with all of your experience, all the conversations that you have had, all the women that you've talked to in Afghanistan, what do you consider missing from global foreign policy, and how do you see this happening or playing out in Afghanistan?
Thank you so much, Medita, and thank you so much for all of this, because it is extremely important, and it's lovely to be sharing the panel with everybody. Sonam, I'm a huge fan. Thank you so much, and I will chime into what Sonam and you just mentioned. Staying with Afghanistan, and I don't want to repeat everything that everybody else has said, so hoping that we can get something more. Just a couple of weeks ago, and in the last couple of weeks, actually, many European countries have diverted the budget from the WPS and UN Women projects completely and fully from many projects that exist around the world, diverting it to the Ukrainian crisis, which is extremely important. And believe me, as an Afghan, we empathize every single day. We bleed still every single day. When it comes to Afghanistan, I can tell you this much, that we have made many wrong strategic tours, or rather, there was no strategy, as you mentioned. Nevertheless, we're still making those mistakes. So the fact that we are normalizing the Taliban by engaging with them, within all delegations, all male delegations, that has nothing to do with the extremism that is going on there. Yes, they're doing horrible things. Over 24 decrees. Horrible abuses against human rights, women's rights have been happening since 15th of August till now. But women's movement and the Afghan women's movement have been, as Sonam just mentioned, they have been extremely active and have been the strongest force against the Taliban since the beginning. In 2017 and 18, when we sat in all of the conventions and Geneva and UN and everywhere, we literally painted out this blueprint of what we're living today. We warned the whole world. But again, nobody listened, although the expertise comes from that. The top peace builder, peace practitioner comes from Afghanistan. She is there. And I spoke to her last night. And one of the countries which was really a blow to my heart is Sweden. Sweden and Norway have cut a lot of their WPS funding. And that is something that I never understand as an Afghan, as well as a Canadian, and as somebody that lives in both worlds and works in both worlds. Why do we have to? The first thing that we cut on the table is at the cost of women. We signed a peace deal, or a so-called framework of a peace deal, at the cost of women and girls. And today, that Afghanistan is the only country that does not allow its women to study secondary school, but the world is watching. Although we don't have to watch, we can do a lot of things. I'll leave it at that, because I know I can speak a lot more. I'll come back to the next round.
All right. Thank you so much, Nahid, for sharing these insights with us. It's invaluable, actually, to have you all here with us today. I'm going to turn to my right side now, State Minister Anna Lyuman. In the face of all the conflicts, all the crises that we're looking at right now, and all of these insights that have been shared with you now, could you tell us what concrete steps the Foreign Office under the G7 presidency has tabled in order to implement a feminist foreign policy, and maybe also how gender-based violence plays a role in that? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me. And indeed, with the new government now, we're implementing a feminist foreign policy. And it's very clear that this really means a very, very broad strategy of changing a method for everyone who works in foreign policy. Not something on the side, not something that's nice to have, but really going to the center of foreign policy. To you all know the aim of 3R plus D, so representation, rights, and resources. You were talking about the importance of resources as well as diversity. So this is really, so we are basically, when we came to office half a year ago, we're caught in the middle of a lot of ongoing crisis and a big new one accelerating. But we're still keeping track and particularly now when we're talking about Ukraine, and it becomes clear once more that crises are not gender blind, right? When we look to Ukraine, we can clearly see that women and girls are impacted differently, are impacted oftentimes worse than others. So it's very clear. I mean, Sanan talked a little bit about this. Of course, sort of at the very heart of it, we need to ask the question about prevention, right? We need to ask the question about, okay, how can we create a system actually that doesn't create those imbalances and those incentives to forge these kind of wars of aggression. That is true, and conflict prevention is also there very high on the agenda. On the other hand, I would also, maybe to spice up the discussion a little bit, also like to challenge you here a little bit, because I think we make a mistake if we sort of suggest that a feminist foreign policy is sort of creates this ideal type of world and is sort of blind to the fact that sometimes in war, also women need to defend themselves with arms. Yeah. And we have a lot of Ukrainian women now coming to us asking for arms, asking for us to support them in their right to defend themselves. And many very brave women also fighting in Ukraine. So I think it's sort of we shouldn't be blind to that part of foreign policy as well, and that can also be actually part of a feminist foreign policy. Also, not to turn a blind eye here. You asked for concrete steps. Here, of course, in the view of these really horrific reports about gender-based violence in Ukraine, we are, of course, stepping up the support to both documenting cases and working with survivors. We've increased our yearly support on the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine. In 2022, we will overall provide 1.5 million euro. We've, of course, stepped up humanitarian aid to Ukraine, which is now at over 400 million euro, and make sure in all the implementation that the feminist perspective is also there, and the gender-sensitive aid approach is used in the distribution. And we will also support a network of survivors already actually since 2014, because war has been going on in Ukraine since 2014 for the survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. So I think that's important. And finally, of course, we support the International Criminal Court by bringing those to justice, holding those to account that are the perpetuators of this violence.
Okay. Thank you very much for sharing these first points with us. I would like to initiate the second round of discussion now with all of you, kind of painting a vision or kind of the future of what a feminist foreign policy could look like, since we now took a look at where we're standing. And I think, Sanam, I would like to turn to you again, and if you would like to, chime in on what the state minister just said. You said before that we have the instruments, we have the WPS agenda, also as part of a feminist foreign policy, as a meaningful peace-building instrument, but it's kind of absent from the discussions on Ukraine and other ongoing conflicts right now. So could you paint us a future, maybe a realistic, maybe also a little optimistic future of what this could look like? Thank you.
I just want to echo what the state minister said. I'm not naive about the question of whether women want to fight when their lives and their nation and so forth is at stake. My point is that we should be striving not to get there, number one. And then once we're there, we should be striving to do whatever it takes to stop the violence and move the discussions back into, or move the conflict back into a dialogue space wherever possible. And within that, also taking into consideration that women who have been part of the fighting forces have their needs as we emerge from conflict. So one of the things that, for example, we saw with South Africa was that women were part of the fight against apartheid. And while many of the men ended up going into the politics, the women, actually, many of them ended up having to go into sex work because there was no program for them. So there was that level of injustice also that happens even for women who are fighting for literally like also involved in the war. Two things I would say. One is Afghanistan, we have to be focused on Afghanistan and get it right, given all the wrongs that we've done. There has to be a genuine focus on how do we heed what people are saying, create spaces for the dialogue. For example, Hannah Neumann, a German MEP, went to Kabul recently, and based on conversations and discussions, the idea was, if you want to talk to the Taliban, because at some point we have to be realistic about it, make sure Afghan women are in the room. It's not rocket science. She was able to do it. Why isn't the UN or why aren't other delegations doing it systematically, right? So we have to create the spaces for direct engagement and involvement. Similarly, with the case of Ukraine, there are dialogues or there are some negotiations going on, whether it's behind the scenes or back channel or track two or whatever you want to call it. We must make sure that if we're not bringing women to the table, if we're not engaging Ukrainian women who are peace builders at present, which we should do, right? Bring them along. They were the ones who were trying to address the issues from 2008 to 2014. Anyway, they're the ones that are still trying to do humanitarian work. Are we supporting their organizations? Are we convening them and listening and asking them for the solutions that they may have? That's one side. The other side of it is making sure that any discussions on ceasefires, truces, etc., also fold into them the question of sexual violence and safe passage for women and girls and children going through. And if the Russians tell us that it's not their soldiers perpetrating these kinds of crimes, why not have a joint investigation team to be there and challenge the, if you want, challenge the lies, challenge everybody's statements, but that are not true on the ground. We have to be moving towards some way of trying to end the violence there, but also making the process inclusive. And you know, again, for example, if we had from 2014 onwards, the business community, the religious community, the militaries from different sides, the women from different sides, young people, the media, in different spaces for dialogue between Russia, Ukraine, the OSCE, and others, would we be where we are now? And is there any way of creating that kind of a space for dialogue from now moving forward, even as the war is going on? We have to do things differently. You know, Einstein said it. You keep doing the same thing, expecting different results. It's madness. We have to change the way we think about war and that we think about peace. And at the end of the day, you know, there is the very macho element to all this, that it's all about sort of domination and coercion. I think a feminist approach to this is more around cooperation, collaboration, coexistence, and care. We have to care about the people that are paying the price for the war, for the mistakes, and for the lack of care to prevent this war and the next war and the next war.
Thank you, Sanam, so much. I would like to actually pick up on what you just said, you know, kind of creating this vision, this future, what we need. Nahid, could you... So given all of these dramatic developments in Afghanistan right now and the sheer complexities of it, could you give us maybe 3 to 4 things that, if you had the chance, which you do, to speak to G7 leader today, what do you need? What does Afghanistan need? What do Afghan women need right now?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sanam, for pointing that out. That I will chime into what Sanam just said. We need the spaces. There are too many people speaking about us, and we have the expertise. We have highly qualified Afghan female experts that go to the UNs and go to the G7 advisory boards and advise them. They advise NATO, they advise everybody, EU. I just came from Brussels for 2 days of sitting down with Thomas Nicholson and Stella, and we were doing work. We were working. We were not just talking somewhere. We were working and analyzing. And that is what we need. There was, and I, with all due respect, I say this, on 9th of March in Germany, in Berlin, there was a humanitarian session about Afghanistan. Not one single Afghan was present. That is shameless. That's shameful. We have, that is saying that we absolutely have no respect for the qualifications of these women. We have hundreds of them. I wrote about 13 of them that just came out. These 13 plus me, we have over 15 languages. Altogether, with the amount of years of experience, if you put them all together, it is over 150 years of experience on the field. We speak languages, we have master's degrees, doctorate degrees, but it's never enough. And that is what is so frustrating, to say that that table, fine, they didn't give it to us during the peace process, fine, but why aren't you, when you talk about solidarity with Afghan women, then what is your solidarity? Walk the talk, please. And that is not happening. That's not happening enough. In Germany, it's really horrible. In the States, it's a little bit better, but it is getting there. But we are sick and tired of lobbying 9 months, and 2 years of education is gone. So imagine, within the next year and a half, if we do not have, and we won't have, a 12-year girls that are going to be graduating from the 12th grade in the state universities, we will not have one single university student, female student, in Afghanistan. That we are not allowed to walk on the streets without a reason, or mahram and all of that stuff. That's a completely different panel, let's say. But that is the first and foremost, really a must, that the G7 leaders have to stay committed to what they have said. And I go back to what you said, accountability. We have to hold these leaders also accountable. You know, it's great to say that, so many millions and trillions of dollars went to Afghanistan. With all due respect, most of it came back through your own contractors. So there are details that we forget. And I go back to what you said before about Ukraine. Yes, Germany is doing an incredible amount of work for Ukraine, and it should. The world is doing as well. But with all due respect, there are Afghans, Syrians, Iraqis, sub-Saharan countries that have been waiting here, not allowed to go to work, not allowed to go to school, not allowed. This is selective humanitarianism, with all due respect. And there's no two way about it. We have to stop and say and basically put a scale and make these checkpoints, and to say that if I'm not blue-eyed, and we have had those words from the media, shame on all of us if we sit here in 2022 and select who gets to do what, and who gets to get food, and who gets to get humanitarian aid. We have plenty of Afghans within Germany, within all of these platforms, but nobody gives them the space. Give them the space. This process belongs to them. If you want to help Afghanistan, work with them. They can do their own work. Just give them the spaces. And that would be, I think, I won't even go to the 3-4. That is the first one that I would ask for.
Right, yeah. State Minister Luhrmann, would you mind reacting to this? Maybe how the Foreign Office thinks about creating space, I think this would be very much valued in this talk today.
No, indeed, that is a key issue. As I said, the representation part of feminist foreign policy, and representatives should, of course, always be the ones that are concerned. I took note of what you said about this meeting on 9 March. I wasn't personally involved, so I can't really comment on it, but I'll follow up and check what happened. I also I think that's sort of this working with those that are capable to actually lead the way out of their own problems. That should be the key guideline. I was myself in Afghanistan back in 2000. What was it, 5, 6, working with Sabrina Saqib, who you might know. I was at that time the youngest member of parliament here in Germany with 19 years. And she was the youngest female member of the Afghan parliament. So I went actually there for 2 weeks and we worked a lot together there. And I did another workshop with all these wonderful women in the Afghan parliament. And then she came to Germany to, first of all, address also a lot of politicians in Germany about the situation, about what is needed. So giving space, represent their own representation, instead of me telling everyone what I saw with my eyes in Afghanistan. She came here and went also to my party colleagues and all that. And yeah, but so I totally hear what you're saying, and also with the perception of double standards, I can assure you that we've really done a a lot at the EU level to make sure, for example, that in the current regulations for migrants coming from Ukraine, that they're not only those included with a Ukrainian passport, but also others and all that. But you know how difficult the discussions about migration policies at EU level are. So this is really a tricky issue. And also, if I may add here, what else we're doing now in this G7 context, we've really also made sure that now in the G7 agenda and discussions and resolutions, really also the issues of gender-based violence, of inclusiveness are really framed also at a very high priority level.
Right, thank you for jumping in here and for going into conversation with each other. I think this is much appreciated, and I hope this can foster more meaningful dialogue, actually. I think this would be much appreciated. So given our time frame, I would actually like to zoom in on a different topic now, a little bit with you, Spagme. I think what we learned so far on this panel is that we don't need policy that merely cushions the effects of violence in society, but that we need systemic change, right? And one thing that really affects women, BIPOC, and LGBTIQ disproportionately is that of gender backlash and anti-rights, anti-democratic movements right now. It's, you know, given the global effects of all of these crises, I think they very much link to what we've debated before here as well. So, Spagme, given the fantastic implementation plan of the Women's 7 and also the communique, how do the Women's 7 envision to counteract these really, really dramatic and violent developments, actually?
Sure, thank you. And this is such an important question, and I think it's one that's becoming even more prevalent by the day. So in our W7 communique, we're asking G7 leaders to counteract anti-gender, anti-rights, and anti-democratic movements, as you've laid out, and to offer protection for those who are facing multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination. We're also asking these governments to really follow through on their political and financial commitments and to see through their words with action and accountability. So I'll name just some of the recommendations that my fellow W7 advisors have laid out. So as related to gender-based violence, the W7 is really asking for long-term, flexible and sustainable funding for the prevention, mitigation, and redress of gender-based violence. We're also asking for the repeal of discriminatory laws, including those that criminalize sexual and reproductive health and rights, and for increased investment into SRHR as essential services. So legal protections and sustainable funding are just two mechanisms that could be used to really counteract against the growing and consistent threat of anti-gender movements. I think it's also important to recognize, particularly in this COVID-19 era, that these threats also exist online, and we should advocate for protection of human rights defenders in online spaces as well. So I think relevant to this question, we should also realize that the opposition is well funded and the opposition is well organized. I'm coming from the United States, and I know that news out of the US has been making global headlines as news around the Roe versus Wade and abortion rights decisions have been disappointing and infuriating, but it's also a case study of the effectiveness of anti-gender movements. So for years, the opposition movement was consistently organizing, building their own alliances, spreading disinformation, and seating anti-choice candidates at local, state, and national levels, including judges whose decision-making can be long-lasting and often permanent. Anti-gender groups are also organizing at multilateral levels, including at the United Nations, conducting their own advocacy with member states, and monitoring developments that are threatening their own agenda. So I think, given all of this, G7 leaders should really reaffirm their commitments to gender equality and human rights by protecting against these voices. If countries are committed to a feminist foreign policy, like a few G7 countries are, then this needs to be top priorities. And I think just a couple of steps to do this are, first, repeal discriminatory laws, including those that permit violence and harassment. Second, implement legislation protecting women human rights defenders. Third, ensure that all policies and programming are gender transformative. Fourth, invest in long-term and sustainable funding for feminist movements. Fifth, continue to conduct research on opposition groups so that we really understand where these movements are coming from, what's going on. And lastly, as my colleagues prioritized in their remarks, to really support feminist civil society and alliances. So given all of these developments, I hope that those are some tangible steps that G7 countries can make to really defend against anti-gender movements worldwide.
Thank you so much, Spagme, for laying out these points. I would like to, before coming to the round of final statements today, I would like to turn to you again and dig out one of the very concrete agendas that we actually have, the Istanbul Convention and its implementation in Europe. And we all know that it's at stake and that it's threatened. And I think it would be really important for the audience to hear from you how the German G7 presidency will assure to protect and strengthen the rights of LGBTIQ and BIPOC in foreign, but also, and I think this is a really important dimension of feminist foreign policy in a domestic context. Thank you.
Yeah, sure, thank you. Yeah, let me start maybe with the Istanbul Convention, because it's really horrific that now not only we see this global backlash against women's rights, but that even some countries have resigned from the Istanbul Convention, particularly Turkey. So we really made the promotion of this convention and the signing of this convention a top priority. Annalena Baerbock has just mentioned it again in her speech at the Council of Europe ministerial meeting last week, and really asked for everyone who hasn't signed it yet to sign it. We do so as well in diplomatic communication, but also in bilateral meetings with the non-signatories like the Armenia, like the Czech Republic, because it's really the Istanbul Convention is really the most far-reaching legal instrument we have. So we really need to strengthen it, build on it, and use it to actually help to prevent and also combat gender-based violence. When it comes to LGBTIQ, here also, the most important sort of results always of this G7 process is first, that things are being brought on the agenda, right? So we've definitely done that, and also included the issue in the development ministers' communique that was just published. We are striving to include it in the leaders' declaration. So just also to really send this clear signal that yes, the G7 highlight this point, and we're pushing back against this backlash. And I think also it's in general it's a really good sign that by now we have 10 countries that have committed to a feminist foreign policy. We're very grateful to the front runners like Sweden, and we're actually now ourselves a bit in the process of learning from them. So we're basically, and also I heard very carefully the suggestions that you made now. So we're basically in listening mode to develop our own strategy of a feminist foreign policy, and to make sure that in the end it brings really tangible results.
Thank you very much. And I think it's pivotal to emphasize again that this is a room full of experts of civil society and feminist experts who have done a lot of work. You have all the knowledge here, and they're all happy to contribute and be part of the conversation. So what I would like to do now is give everyone on the panel the opportunity to have a final statement. And Sanam, I would like to start with you. Please remember to stick to your time limit a little bit. That would be great, like all of you, because I know there's so much to say, but we have so little time, and I hope that we can carry on this conversation at some other point. So Sanam, the floor is yours. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I'll keep it very simple. 77 years ago, after World War II, world leaders at the time got together and they came up, the Charter of the UN was formed. It took us 500 years to finally create the institution. I've done the research into the history of what the ideas were. Finally, we get the UN after 2 world wars. And the essence of it is that future generations should never experience the scourge of war. 77 years later, we have over 80 million people internally displaced. We're spending over $2 trillion on weaponry. we are heading back into a place which is incredibly dangerous. And it really is up to our generation to change that kind of, it's like a big tanker. It's heading into a gigantic iceberg. We have to shift it. We have to turn it. And again, the good news is that we have so many of the structures in place. It's really about drawing on them, fostering the ecosystem for peace and the prevention of violence. It's about co-creation, because me sitting at an INGO, government, local organizations, all of us are needed. And honestly, the cost of doing what I'm saying is minuscule compared to the cost of a missile or a nuclear warhead. I'm coming from England right now. We're putting 10 billion pounds into 40 new warheads, nuclear warheads. They're only useful if they're entirely useless. Just think about it. And why do we need 40? Again, I'm not naive. Let's have 35. Let's have 25. Put the money into human security, human rights, dignity. That's all most people want. We should not allow that 0.01% who benefit from war and violence to be dictating our futures forever. And that's really what's happening right now. So it's really a challenge to our generation and to our leaders right now. And I think we can do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Spagme, over to you.
Thanks. I'll just reiterate a point that Sana made earlier. But when we're looking at conflicts in Afghanistan, in Ukraine, all these protracted conflicts around the world, I think it's important to really use the feminist foreign policy framework to understand why it is that we got here in the first place. What are the systems of colonialism, capitalism, extractivism that continue to fuel these conflicts, and how do we avoid them? So I'll just reiterate that point once more and point to feminist foreign policy as a mechanism to humble ourselves, to imagine a new world order, and to chart a pathway forward that is more productive, that questions our positionality in traditional geopolitics and looks at a more peaceful world order. And of course, the point about funding, I'm glad that it was raised in the summit yesterday, and I'm glad that it's a priority today. But really, we're looking to G7 countries this year and in subsequent G7 summits, G20 summits, to commit more funds to gender equality globally, not just in their domestic budgets, but also as part of their official development assistance. And really to invest directly into feminist movements and to civil society globally, so that we know where the money is going, and we know that it's going to a more productive and transformative place.
Great. Thank you so much. Nahid.
Thank you. I'll take your 40 seconds. Before I say, I will stay with my time. Oxfam, thank you so much for being here. The Oxfam report just came out about 24 hours ago, if I'm not mistaken. I just want to give you some numbers that are going to be in your mind before I tell you why you'll connect the dots. 263 million and 573 million. 263 million is the number of people pushed into extreme poverty since the start of the pandemic. And 573 million, almost double, is the number of the new billionaires created since the start of the pandemic. The top 10 richest billionaires in the world, all men, by the way, are worth more than the bottom 40% of the entire human race. Billionaires' wealth went up more during the first 24 months of the pandemic than in the last 23 years combined. So for those who are trying to say that we have been together in this pandemic, please save it. We haven't been in solidarity in this pandemic. And at the same time, for these kind of billionaires, we call them super rich, the normal people. And for those who are really thinking about not taxing, we should be thinking about taxing these super rich billionaires. It is not okay for 10 men to be having more than 40% of the human race. That is not okay. There's something wrong there. And having said that, I would like, and this is a recommendation or a demand from a lot of the Afghan women experts and defenders, like Maryam Safi, and reinvest your money in WPS, please. Because if you don't, that what is happening in Afghanistan will be the case in many different countries. And it is the women's movement that upholds the values of the G7, that the G7 countries, so I always say this, they hold these values in word with such pride, but it is those women on the ground that do the work. So don't make that mistake to say that is the reason why we do things, but please walk the talk.
Thank you so much, Nahid. State Minister Luhrmann, the floor is yours before I hand over to Fumi to wrap up this really incredible panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, a foreign policy that's not feminist risks overlooking the interests and the rights of half of the population. So for me, it's a no-brainer that any foreign policy actually needs to be feminist. And I think all of us here agree on this observation, but and overall in the world, I think we've made progress towards this goal of a feminist foreign policy in some ways, and we have had setbacks in many other important ways. And the progress is that actually these kind of issues are now at the center of G7 meetings, that we have so many countries that commit to a feminist foreign policies, that we have a all too slow increase of women in the field of foreign policy, of representation, in the UN and security and all that. But we have horrific setbacks. I mean, just talking about Afghanistan, of course, where we had decades of at least hope, education, progress, and now really a lot of darkness. And we have setbacks when it comes also, when we look around in Europe, to far-right populist movements, to far-right extremist movements that are really challenging. I mean, I sit always right next to the German radical right party, AfD, in the parliament. What they say when women speak in parliament is not to be repeated here. So we have a lot of setbacks, and that's why I think we not only need to walk the talk, as you said, but we also, those of us that believe in this agenda, really need to combine forces and really need to work together in order to achieve our goals, because the opposition is really very fierce. And as I said, we are in the process of formulating this feminist foreign policy, so we're really open for suggestions, for your feedback, for your ideas, to include them now in our strategy. And I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation on that.
Thank you very much. And I would now like to ask Fumi Saito to come on stage and wrap up this panel for us and give your thoughts on what you've heard and what we're looking forward to maybe as well. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to wrap up the last panel discussion, which is really intriguing and exciting to hear. In this session, actually, the panel is talking about gender-based violence and the implementation of feminist foreign policy. And I tried to be a little bit short. And then Spogmay introduced the core principles of feminist foreign policy. And she also calling for accountability and a time-bound and measurable commitment. And also, Professor Sanam, she studied with historical background of women, peace and security from her experience for 22 years and focusing on people on the ground and gender responsiveness. And she also questioned all of us about our responsibility for the future generations and as opposed to the current trend of militarization. And Nahid talked about the diversion of the money from women, peace and security and UN women, and pointed out the situation of Afghan and Afghanistan women and girls, which is left behind from the current discussion. She also called on G7 leaders to create a space for Afghan women to lead the peace processes and intervention of Afghan. The minister emphasized to commit assistance to Ukraine to be gender responsive and gender justice and survivor centers. And she also promised to follow up to respond to the Nahid. And also, Minister explained German commitment to Istanbul Convention. So I have to mention about the Istanbul Convention. Istanbul Convention, as the minister said, sets a holistic approach of the gender-based violence. And but so the Istanbul Convention is a convention of the Council of the Europe, but actually it doesn't prohibit other countries outside of Europe to join the convention. In fact, all countries in the G7 countries outside of the Europe, and which is the United States and Canada and Japan, all have an observer status to the Council of Europe, which means so the observer status countries have obligation to follow the principle of the Council of Europe, which means that G7 actually leader summit is the ideal platform to promote Istanbul Convention. So we W7 advisors call on the G7 country or G7 leaders to follow the Istanbul Convention and then to promote the implementation of gender-based violence-related laws and policies, normative framework, and plans. And the last, actually, responding to Dr. Sanam's question and to all of us, and we have to do things differently. And how do we do it? One of the responses from W7 advisors is to implement feminist foreign policy. So that's all.
Thank you very much, Fumi. G7 leaders, there's a lot of work to do to translate everything that we just heard into tangible outcome. Feminist and women-led civil society organizations are here. They will challenge you and hold you accountable because it's time to deliver now. And this is where I hand over to Juliane again. Thank you all very much for being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this very intense but very engaging panel. So we have a short break now to prepare ourselves for the presence of the G7 President and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Please be back at 1:30 sharp. See you then. Bye. Thank you so much for joining us again, because now it starts the most important part of the W7 2022, the handing over of our recommendations towards the G7 President and His Excellency, the Chancellor Scholz. But without further ado, I will hand over to our President, the President of the National Council of German Women's Organizations, Dr. Beate von Mikael. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Juliane. Your Excellency, Chancellor Scholz, dear Chairwoman of the G7 Gender Equality Advisory Board, Professor Almendinger, dear Women 7 representatives, dear colleagues, allies, and friends, distinguished audience. It is a great honor for me to welcome you to the W7 Summit, Your Excellency Chancellor Scholz, today. The G7 presidency is a major opportunity for Germany to deliver on its feminist foreign policy agenda and to promote the rights, resources, and the representation of women and marginalized groups. With your attendance, you are prioritizing this agenda. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Beate von Mikael, and I'm the president of Deutscher Frauenrat, the National Council of German Women's Organizations that represents 60 national women's associations and organizations. And I'm proud that we are taking our advocacy to the international level and hosting this year's Women 7, the Civil Society Dialogue on Gender Equality to the G7. Germany's G7 presidency in 2022 comes at a time of global crisis. The war in Ukraine, the climate crisis, and the COVID-19 pandemic. We are deeply concerned about the violent effects these overlapping crises have on women and girls all over the world. And here are some numbers. More than 5.5 million people have fled Ukraine since the war began, according to the UN Refugee Agency, and the majority are women and children. Up to 80% of the 21.5 million people fleeing due to climate-related disasters are women. With the pandemic, it will take us at least another 136 years to close the overall gender gap. And indeed, this is where the G7 countries have to act. In this historical moment, the G7 presidency brings with it a special responsibility to recognize the gendered impact of the current intersecting crisis, to enter in dialogue with civil society from all over the world, as we kindly do today, and to lead the world towards a gender-just economic and political transition with bold political and financial contributions. It is high time to see action, to see results and clear commitments by the G7 on gender equality. Time to deliver for a gender-just world has been the rallying call of the Women 7 in the last months. We have learned from experience how vital it is that G7 gender commitments are subject to accountability mechanisms. Their progress must be tracked and evaluated. Women 7 brought together an international network of feminist civil society advocates that developed a set of powerful demands on gender equality to the G7. I want to highlight here that 1/3 of our Women 7 advisors comes from the Global South. For us, this is crucial. G7 needs to open to the voices from the Global South. We very much welcome the collaboration of the 4 G7 partner countries of this year: India, Indonesia, South Africa, and Senegal. At the same time, more efforts are necessary to include further countries and groups, in particular feminist civil society, and to provide the financial resources that allow for their meaningful involvement. At Women 7, more than 60 advocates from 24 countries discussed and elaborated their most pressing demands on G7 leaders in a multi-stage consultation process over several months. And today, I'm humbled to present to you the priorities of our network of renowned feminist advocates condensed in the W7 communiqué. Before the handover, I would like to take the opportunity and highlight our main demands. At Women 7, we call on the G7 leaders to ensure meaningful participation and representation of women and girls at all levels of decision-making, to apply gender equality as a cross-cutting principle, and to use instruments such as gender impact assessments to address structural discrimination, to implement gender-responsive budgeting globally and domestically to make the gendered impacts of budgets visible, including on unpaid care work, to invest in sex and gender-responsive intersectional data generation, and finally, to introduce an accountability mechanism that tracks and reports about the progress towards gender equality in the G7. Your Excellency, Chancellor Scholz, the German G7 presidency aims for progress towards an equitable world. With this communiqué, Women 7 offers you the tools to achieve this goal. We even included an implementation plan with concrete political and financial goals and indicators. It is all in here. Now we need you to support us in this. Let's use the G7 to really transform the system for sustainable solutions and gender equality at the heart of them. It is time to deliver on a gender-just future. Now, it is my pleasure and great honor to hand over the W7 communiqué to you as G7 President.
Sehr geehrte Frau Dr. von Miquel,
Dr. von Miquel,
sehr geehrte Frau Professor Almendinger,
Professor Almendinger,
sehr geehrte Damen und Herren,
ladies and gentlemen,
für Ihre Empfehlung.
thank you very much for your recommendations. We will take a close look at them in preparation of the G7 summit in Elmau.
G7-Engagementgruppen sind die
The Women's Seven are truly something special among the G7 engagement groups. They represent the interests of half the population. You are the voice of civil society standing up for women's and equality policy, and you take a stand for the LGBTIQ community. And there is also another special thing about W7. You are not only looking at topics important to women and girls in the G7 states. You understand yourselves as the voice for 4 billion women and girls across the globe. This is in line with the ambition of the German G7 presidency to look beyond the G7 members only. This is why I have also invited the heads of state of India, Indonesia, Senegal, South Africa and Argentina to the summit in Elmau. You, as the W7, have even gone further in your approach. You have involved representatives of a whole of 26 countries, and among them many countries of the global south. And this is necessary, because human rights are universal and indivisible. If women's rights are violated in one place in the world, it affects us all, and vice versa. Progress made in one place can make the whole world benefit. I am thinking, for example, of the exemplary fight of women's rights activists in Latin America fighting against domestic violence. So it is a very good thing that the women's rights movement has always been a symbol of cooperation and international solidarity. Thank you very much for your engagement. In your recommendations, you rightly point out that the big challenges of our time and our answers to them are not gender neutral. By the way, they have never been. On the contrary, what's often described as gender neutral usually means nothing else but by male standards. It starts with the history of humankind that for a long time has mainly been researched and documented by men. It continues with medicines largely approved and tested along male standard values, construction provisions that are mainly guided by male needs, safety in cars tested with male dummies. And it has far-reaching consequences for the labor market as well, where men are often better paid than their female colleagues for the same job. And these are only a few examples. There are countless more from culture, science and academia, business, or the digital world of algorithms. Information and data about female needs and women are less often collected, analyzed, and factored in accordingly. The author, Caroline Criado Perez, established the assumption that women in our world were basically invisible. This is quite a sobering and also a frightening observation in the 21st century. The perspective of women needs to be factored in all fields of life in equal terms. This is why I support the call for more involvement that is found all over the W7 communique from the bottom of my heart. And I'm aware of the fact that politics as well needs to catch up on many things. The fact that in Germany we have a 50-50 cabinet of men and women for the first time now should not even be a headline in 2022. It should go without saying. It should be a normal thing. 50% of humanity must hold 50% of power. And a strong involvement of women on all decision-making levels, especially in executive positions, is needed. The G7 in particular need to live up to that standard. After all, we understand ourselves as a community of democratic values, and the principle of equality is one, if not the essential pillar of any democracy. So gender equality also must be the goal of any democrat. We are clearly lagging behind in this field in Germany, but in many other countries as well. This is why I have always been a proponent of a gender quota. In Germany, we have enshrined this in a law on promoting women in leadership positions, amongst other things, and we have largely expanded that law a year ago. By 2025, we want to reach parity in leadership positions in the public service. We will take a close look at whether we will get closer to our goal of reaching equality between men and women in this decade. What is important is to detect shortcomings, and we will add a new tool as G7 to help us detect such shortcomings. I'm talking about a monitoring mechanism here that will be used to strictly monitor our own progress in terms of equality as the G7, and it goes back to a recommendation of the Gender Equality Advisory Council of the last year that you are also highlighting in your recommendations. Much still needs to be done, and we've seen this in these 2 years of the COVID pandemic that hit women substantially harder than men. Surveys show that women have shouldered the lion's share caring for children, while schools and daycare institutions had been closed, and the pre-existing gender care gap has exacerbated during the crisis. As the German government, we want to take more targeted action, for example, by wage compensation for people taking time off to care for relatives in need of care. It is about better recognizing unpaid care work and show real appreciation and respect. We will improve working conditions for unpaid care work that is often shouldered by women. It is a question of respect. And of course, this task does not end in the wealthy G7 countries. In many developing countries, it is especially women and girls who do a lot of unpaid care work at home in caring for others and childcare, and that goes to the detriment of the economic empowerment of women. So the topic also played an important role on the agenda of G7 ministers for development who met last week. Together, we want to strengthen the nursing care sector in partner countries, for example, by the Global Alliance for Care. The pandemic has also reinforced misogynistic trends in all our countries. As sad as it is, for women, the most dangerous place often is their own home. And for me, that means that the state needs to better protect those affected. Their rights need to be at the heart of our measures. In Germany, we will expand the support system of counseling, women's shelters, and other protected spaces. But actually, we need to start much earlier to prevent violence against women. I'm thinking of what we see on the internet and in social media on a daily basis. Again and again, women are becoming the target of sexualized forms of hate and incitement. So we want to make sure that the Istanbul Convention is implemented in the digital sphere as well. A coordinating body that is to implement this convention is intended to start their work at the end of the year. We want to create a German-wide legal framework for protecting every woman and her children from violence. If we speak about violence against women these days, our thoughts are, of course, with the women and girls in Ukraine. Once again, we have to witness that women are particularly affected in wars and conflicts. I'm thinking of those who become victims of sexual violence, as had been the case in Bucha and other places where Russian troops raged. I'm thinking of those whose partners are fighting in the trenches or have fallen. I'm thinking of the millions of women who had to flee to the EU with their children and their parents and basically start from scratch here. For me, it is absolutely natural that we do everything we can to welcome them here and offer them good prospects. At the same time, war crimes, especially against women, must not go unpunished. As G7 states, we support the legal examination and prosecution of such crimes and see how we can improve accountability for human rights violations, including sexual and gender-based violence. We are working relentlessly for the implementation of the agenda Women, Peace and Security. We have long known that women are needed for lasting and inclusive peace processes. There are many other topics that you have set on the G7 agenda as the W7 that are worthwhile talking about. For example, climate change. Especially the climate movement is and has always been marked by women. And we might talk about this in our discussion later on. But let me share one thought to wrap up, because it is very important to me. The women's rights activist Marie-Elisabeth Lüders once said about the state of equality, if you don't continue fighting, you might lose what you've already achieved. In the US, women have to fear that the Supreme Court might reopen a 50-year-old groundbreaking case on abortion rights and might reverse it. So it was important for me that we in Germany have finally deleted paragraph 219A of the Criminal Code. That we finally deleted it. It was a timely moment. It was the paragraph prohibiting doctors from providing information on abortion. But the discussion about para 219A shows progress does not fall into our lap and rights are never carved in stone. They need to be defended again and again, also in free democratic societies. And it is not enough to only prevent regresses. We need forces for progress, progressive forces, pooled also in the W7. Thank you very much for your great commitment for the work that you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We are truly humbled that you are taking the time and we'll have a seat at our table for a turn. So thank you so much. We prepared a couple of questions, but before we start with this, I will obviously introduce our panel to you, because I just realized we have 3 people representing our 64 advisors, but coming from 6 countries in these 3 people. So what you'll learn later on. If you take a look at the screen, we asked the audience at the beginning of the day, what is the most important thing that needs to be done to achieve gender equity? And I think the most words can't be read from here because it's so much that needs to be done. I think it's a clear message. But in the center, we can read feminist foreign policy, invest in care, create decent work, fund public services. And I think this just really describes what we discussed in the last 2 days very intensely. Put money in the hands of women and invest in care infrastructure. I think that's a very good start. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce my panelists here with me. And sitting right next to me, it's Marie-Claire Capotier. She is both from France and from Côte d'Ivoire, I'm sorry. Thank you so much. You're an activist and founder and the executive director of Les Orchidées Rouges, and you campaign for the eradication of female genital mutilation and all kinds of gender-based and sexual violence. So good to have you here. Thank you so much. And sitting next to her is our W7 advisor, Sini Maria Heikkilä, from Finland, now living in the UK. And you're a senior advocacy advisor at the Sherry Blair Foundation for Women in the UK, and as I said, originally from Finland. She leads the implementation of the foundation's advocacy work to promote women's entrepreneurship and economic empowerment. Thank you for being here. And last but never least, our advisor, Shervan Hussein from Iraq. She is a gender specialist who primarily focused on gender-based violence prevention and related topics at large humanitarian organizations in Iraq, and now works in the Norwegian Church Aid. So as I said, 6 countries, 3 people, I think that's a good thing. So Marie-Claire, I think we just start directly. We have 2 rounds of questions prepared for you. So we have the first 3 questions, and then I would like you to answer those. Okay? So Marie-Claire.
Thank you. Chancellor Scholz, I'm very honored to ask you the following question. Some G7 countries have already adopted or intend to adopt a feminist foreign policy. This means a radical shift in foreign policy, and now which is in view with the war in Ukraine, an even bigger challenge. How do you, as G7 president, intend to promote this radical shift in foreign policy toward a feminist foreign policy with concrete actions?
Thank you. Sini, would you just follow-up.
Thank you very much. And Your Excellency, welcome to the Women 7 Summit. Thank you, Juliana, for the warm introductions. I'd like to make a comment on women's economic empowerment, if I may. So women's economic empowerment has been a key priority for the G7 in recent years, especially through initiatives from development finance institutions focused on women's entrepreneurship. And it's vital and important that the G7 continues to address the multiple diverse barriers to women's economic empowerment, including unpaid care work, including discriminatory laws and social norms, and limited access to economic opportunities. And it's also vital to include women in unstable settings and those who work in the informal sector in these initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Shan.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Thank you so much for having me here. As you touched on it in your speech, you know that the pandemic has exposed the care crisis and extra burden on unpaid and underpaid women carers. The W7, therefore, very much welcomes the focus of the G7 presidency on the Given to Care, including the excellent G7 conference on care. The W7 has proposed that the government should spend an additional 2% of GDP on public service providing health and care. This will ensure that women's unpaid care burden are reduced, and there is more decent work in this female-dominated area, and the care for all the community is improved. Furthermore, research has shown that the multiplier effect of such investment will increase government's tax revenue. So my question is here. What are your plans to prioritize care within the G7, and can they include this kind of social investment in their social infrastructure? Thank you.
Thank you so much. So the floor is yours.
Thank you for the questions and the opportunity to answer to your questions. First, let me say, I think it is necessary that we stick to the course. When we spoke about feminist foreign policy, this was something which was debated because many people were discussing it, were laughing at it, thinking this is not real politics and things like that. And this is absolutely not true. Because if we look at the situation in the world, we see any day, we see all the days that there are a lot of problems that could not be managed if we don't understand the situation of women and if we are not managing to change situations. And as you know, I have already had a trip to Africa. I visited Senegal and I visited Niger and South Africa, and I could report from all these three countries about the debates we had on promoting the situation of women. But I will just stick to one of them. This is Niger, where the president of the country is very intensely discussing the topics which are coming from the situation of women, that there are very early marriages, that they get their children very early, that there are approximately 7 children per woman, which is now the situation of the country, and that the economic perspectives of the whole country are really devastated by that situation. So he is doing a lot of political proposals, which is, I think, really a very risky activity. But he is saying we have to change that situation. And one of the attempts to change the situation is to better the situation of women and having a better chance for them to get education at schools and attending the school for the whole time and not just 2-3 years. And then having a chance to reduce to change the situation again. He addressed a big congress of 1,000 women, he told me, and saying that they should, together with him, work on that situation and get make some progress feasible. But this is really tough politics, which is important for all of us to do. And so I think it is necessary that we say we will not change this. And when we are discussing about war, this is not something different to this strategy. I already mentioned the consequences of the war, especially for women in Ukraine. And we have to understand that it would be a big mistake to believe that this is nothing that is important for the things we are going to do. I think it is necessary that we discuss about jobs and how they are paid, that we discuss about equality of paying for women and men. And there is still a big task to do. I often said in Germany, when I started with politics in my 20s, I thought that this would be something that could be solved in 10 years. And now I'm 63, and it is not solved. Yes, there had been a lot of progress, but we are far away from solving the situation. So now in my 60s, I say it should be the 10 years, and we should be successful now with a lot of very strict regulation that we could implement in our country to get there. Seeing that other countries are better than we are, but also seeing that there are also a lot of countries that are not far away from a solution of this problem. So we need legislation, and we need an understanding that this is of essence for a political success, that we make this progress feasible and that we have fair payments and a fair and safe environment for the regulation of women workers. And in the question of what we can do with care, I do agree. It's also about paying. We have to admit this. One of the reasons for having not enough qualified people working in the care business is that they are not paid well. This will have to do, obviously, a lot with the situation that most of the people working there are women. And if we change that situation, it's also a perspective to get more people into the job, but also developing better circumstances for the activities of women doing these jobs if they are employed, but also for their economic and professional perspectives they have in many other sectors, because solving the childcare questions and solving the care questions is good for women and men and their perspectives in our society. And so this is a very important task for politics of the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's very good to know it's only 10 more years. So, Marie-Claire, I know you have a second question.
Yes. So...
Not 10 more years, up to the end of this decade. Mrs. Albendinger, it's all quick.
My second question is the following. Progress in gender equality is impossible without the involvement of all the women and girls over the world, and also men awareness. How are G7, the G7 leader and their partners doing to reduce now and in the future the real inequality for Black, Indigenous, and people of color and LGBTIQ in the society?
Thank you. Chan, and please use the microphone.
Of course. So my second question is about climate. How does the G7 under the German presidency intend to advance real action and financing commitment on climate, especially loss and damage, beyond the opt-in climate club? Scotland has committed funding for loss and damage. Will the G7 let others lead on this agenda, or get out front of the issue as they are the existing club of historically highest emitters?
Thank you so much. And the last question will be coming from Sini.
I wanted to ask a little bit more about the accountability mechanisms. So true progress in gender equality requires data and a way to track it over time. And at the moment, G7 lacks a mechanism by which the fulfillment of gender equality commitments can be measured. So as you know, the G7 Accountability Working Group launched in 2009 only focuses on development-related commitments, which means that other commitments relating to wider domestic and foreign policy areas are currently not tracked by any kind of accountability mechanism. So there's a gap in the G7 monitoring and accountability infrastructure, which threatens to undermine the delivery of gender equality commitments. And I'd like to ask, how does the G7 presidency plan to advance G7 accountability mechanism? Thank you.
Please.
Yeah, thank you for the three questions. possibly I might start with the last one, because I had the chance to announce that we will do something like this as part of the agenda of this G7 meetings, and that we will implement it into the activities of G7. So it is necessary, but it will be done. So this is not a promise for far future. It will happen this year, and I'm very happy that we can give this report, and thank you for asking me. If we discuss about the question how we can better the world, it is necessary that we fight against all ways of discrimination. This must be a sort of, must be an aspect of politics. And this is even so when we understand that the world we are living in will become more and more diverse due to many different criteria we have to look at. But you mentioned the different ones. If we look at the questions of migration, if we look at the situation of indigenous people and other aspects, it is necessary that we understand that the world is not just painted after one model. There are many different models and ways to live, and there are many different origins. And this is also, if we look at the situation of women, and if we look at the situation of people that have different perspectives on those sexual activities, and it is necessary that we do not discriminate people, and that this is an agreement in our society we work for. And I'm very happy that on the level of this G7 meetings, and even when there are mostly just men sitting around the table, this is part of the agenda, and that there is an awareness which we can use. And in the question of climate, which we discuss intensely, it is important that we have a very ambitious aim. And it is very ambitious to say that in the midst of this century we want to be climate neutral. And this is a big task in all the different countries. It would be a big mistake if we, in the very rich countries in the G7, are the rich democracies of the world, would say that we understood that the things we did the last 200 years with industrialization cannot go on that way, and then ask the people from the global south that they have to understand that they cannot do the same. They could not raise the standard of living in their countries, and they should just understand. This will not work, obviously not. So we have to cooperate to solve this big task for all of us. And my view is that we understand that especially the richest economies have a certain task to do their things that are feasible now. And it is to change the way how we produce things. It will be necessary to go to renewable energies. It will be necessary to change the way how we produce steel, how we do chemistry, how we do building of houses and cement and things like this. And if this is going away from fossil resources, from coal, from oil, from gas, natural gas, it is a break in the way of the industrial model we have that had the last 200 years. But it can be done today because we exactly know how to do it. And if you go around, you will see that all the people active in the business sectors have the concrete idea what should be the next investment to make this happen. And this is the task of us in the G7 countries and other rich economies, that they do it for serving the whole world, but also for developing with their engineers the techniques that then could be used all over the globe. And for doing these activities, for doing these investments, we need a way of cooperation. And this is what I understand with the idea of a climate club, a global and open climate club. Yes, it is sure that there will be different paths. And all the different countries will have to go different ways. But they have to go. And if we just find a way how we compare each other and understand that we are all on the right track, it could be a way to avoid what might come out of the situation also, that all countries are deciding on their necessary activities, that they impose some new duties to the companies and the business sector, and then develop tariffs and border adjustment mechanisms to save their own industry, but giving others not a chance to participate in the progress. And if we do it with a climate club which is open, we can manage that the different perspectives could be put together. So this is my view on this question.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking your time to engage with us. And we're really honored that you literally took our recommendations into your hands. So I think that's a good place for them. And we trust you to discuss this with your colleagues from the G7. And I want you to know that we also approach the other G7 members because we know it needs to be a joint decision at the end. So we are looking forward to stay in touch, and we will be here for more advice to come and that help you on the way to finally implement gender justice once and for all. So thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, and thank you for your activities and for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we will be back in about 15 minutes, so please stay put. Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in today and to be back after the break, because we have several very interesting people still to come. And the next one is someone you might know already because she's a very motivated and very energetic feminist, and we are very happy to have her. I'd like to warmly welcome Professor Almdinger. She is this year's chair of the Gender Equality Advisory Council, and as I just said, she is a feminist by heart because you already told me, but also she is a scientist, and we believe that we need more data to make our cases. So, Professor Almdinger, the floor is yours. We are happy to understand what's going to happen next.
Thank you very, very much for this kind introduction, dear women of W7, and now they are only cameramen, but we are very much integrating men as well. I watched yesterday's performance, and congratulations, the W7 is nothing but a powerhouse. Great, thank you. I'm indeed very stunned, I have to say, and I like to say, by the knowledge, the energy, the commitment, the wisdom, the engagement of all those wonderful women connecting the entire world. I'm also deeply impressed, really deeply impressed by the solidarity. We not always have solidarity, at least not in this country, but here is solidarity rather than competition. W7, W20, Y7 march together, hand in hand, encompassing all ages, classes, sexual preferences, and identities. They do it across continents, political systems, and climate zones. This is really important, and it's exactly what we need, a women's movement joined by everyone. Gender equality cannot be achieved by individuals alone. And gender inequality is not our individual fault. Stop blaming the victim. This is what I usually have to say, and very often so. Instead, it is high time to change systems that maintain structural and physical discrimination, politics that allocate unequal highly gendered resources, cultures that perpetuate gender stereotypes. It's time to join forces. Let's do it together. As chairwoman of GIEC 2021, the G7's Gender Equality Advisory Council, I will contribute my very, very best to achieve this goal. We invite women and men, known and unknown, old and young, rich and poor, straight and queer, from G7 states and G7 partner states. It is a fascinating group, diverse in many dimensions, but united in their uniqueness. GIEC 2022 will ground its work on what has been established by the GIECs in Canada, in France, in Great Britain. It's wonderful work, and there is no reason whatsoever to rewrite excellent work already been done. But we honor our promise to trace progress and backlash. It's important to track developments because we simply do not have the time to reiterate again and again goals G7 have already settled on. And I very much hope that I did not misunderstood Minister Paus yesterday in saying that this scoreboard is now established and working. We'll also focus on the horrible developments since the last GIEC. The Russian assault on the Ukraine, the developments in Afghanistan, and what it means for women and girls in particular. Lack of money, energy, nutrition, health, freedom to move, and so much more. This is what we were working on. For GIEC, as for W7, it's indeed time to deliver. There is no way back to the world we once had. And as I may add personally, we do not want to have this world back. Instead of building back better, we need on to move to an inclusive, fair, and just world. We have to do so determined, strong as we are, and without patience for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And just for 1 second, I mean, you are applauding already, but I think we need to give the GIEC a sign that W7 will stand on your side to discuss with you and to join our forces to get gender equity done by the G7 and beyond. So, some applause for this. We're here to join our forces, definitely.
Yes, we do so.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
For your work.
So, and it's very good to know that it's not just in the G7 we have a women network, but we also have it in the G20. So our sisters from W20 wanted to come to Berlin, but sadly they couldn't. But we're very happy to have a video from the W20 chairwoman, Hadani Uli Siladahi, who will send her greetings to us, to our summit. So enjoy the next video. At least I hope it comes.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor for me to speak here at this remarkable journey of W7 Summit. My name is Hadriani Uli Silalahi, and I'm the chair of W20 Indonesia. W20 is sending support for our sisters, W7, for their successful journey, which is now being finalized with W7 Summit. As we all agree, Summit is the crucial point of our progress. Us here in W20 is also preparing for our summit, which is happening on July 19 to 21st in Lake Toba, North Sumatra. We are extending our invitation to you, our dearest sisters, to strengthen our commitment in women empowerment, while also enjoying the beautiful island of Sumatra, Indonesia. Our mission in W20 is showing concrete commitment in eradicating discrimination, in advocating economic inclusion of women MSMEs, increased access for rural women and women with disability, and integration of gender equitable health response in integrated into G20 leaders' declaration. Since the early beginning of both our work, W7 and W20 recognized that importance of collaboration towards placing gender equality at the center of discussion of G20 and G7. We know that our line of work is crossing each other and is complementary to each other. Therefore, we endorse W7 recommendations being shaped into the communique. What is more important now is the commitment being shown by the G7 and G20 leaders in ensuring that our recommendations are implemented by the countries. We hope that moving forward, there are progress and concrete actions taken by our leaders in ensuring women and girls achieving adequate access and equality in the future. I'm sending my best wishes for the last day of the summit. I hope the high panel discussions went fruitful and enjoyable for everyone. We support you from Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, I can just return the greetings. So, dear sisters from W20 in Indonesia and all over the world, thank you so much for your support. And here we are standing at your side. So, as you just learned, the G20 is hosted by Indonesia this year, and coming up is India next year. And the G7 will be led by Japan. And I'm very, very happy to also have our W7 advisor from Japan here among us. So, Fumi, please join me on stage, because we are really excited to understand, is there already anything planned for next year? Are you still looking for ideas? Can we talk to you about this? Or
looking for ideas and funding too, and so you can feed into me and then also another Japanese civil society. So yes, please give me some ideas. And well, I actually learned a lot of ideas from you.
That's good. So just 1 second. I think I'll give you the floor, and later over a glass of wine we'll share the ideas, but we'll listen to you first.
Well, thank you for inviting me here again to talk about the prospects of the W7 in Japan next year. But before that, first of all, I'd like to thank the National Council of German Women's Organization for hosting this wonderful W7 in Berlin. Over the last 2 days, we had extremely interesting and very insightful discussions. The sessions covered some recent and critical topics to existing gender issues, pointing out the need for holistic approach. I also appreciate the organizers' genuine hospitality. Thank you so much. In this W7, the cooperation between German government and civil society was also one of the highlights. We hope to continue to have this cooperative relationship with any governments in the future, including the next year's Japan. We welcome cooperation from governments not only to help organize W7, but also commit to promoting gender equality. However, at the same time, it is also crucial to maintain independence from governments, free from interference, so that civil society can be free to challenge policymakers and criticize policies. Healthy criticism and dialogue is a necessary part of advancing good policy making. We saw some excellent examples of this in yesterday's and today's panel discussions, where the ministers, high-ranking officials, and civil society representatives discussed issues at the same table. I sincerely hope to see the issues that were raised here today reflected in the G7 leaders' communique, and more importantly, in concrete commitments and implementations. Let me now talk about Japan and the prospects of the W7 next year. My organization, JOICEF, Japanese Organization for International Cooperation in Family Planning, works on creating a society in which women and girls can make their own choices regarding their sexual and reproductive health and rights. JOICEF also co-leads the gender unit of the Japanese Civil Society Network of SDGs with Japan Women Unit, Japan Women's Watch. Next year, as Japan hosts the G7 summit, we'd like to host the G7, no, not G7, W7, well, G7 too, W7 together with other Japanese civil society groups. In the SDGs, Goal 5 sets gender equality, but we heard many times in this last 2 days, gender is a cross-cutting issue, so we have to work on all 17 goals through gender lens by breaking down silos. In addition, unlike the Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, SDGs require every country, including the G7 countries, to tackle the issues set in the SDGs within their own countries. So that means advocacy for gender equality and the rights of women and girls, including sexual reproductive health and rights, is needed for not only for the Global South, but also for G7 countries. We hope that W7 will provide opportunity to advance gender equality and solve gender-related issues in Japan, linking global issues to regional and national issues. Japan finds itself in a very unique position. While it is recognized as one of the most economically developed countries in the world, but it is much less developed in terms of gender equality. Indeed, in the 2021 Gender Gap Index of the World Economic Forum, Japan ranked 120th in the among 156 countries, 120th, of course the lowest among the G7 countries, while Germany ranks 11th, the highest among G7 countries, and followed by France 16th, UK 23rd, Canada 24th, United States 30th, and Italy 63rd. None of the G7 countries are within top 10. So that means we have a lot of work. Well, thank you. There are many domestic issues that contribute to hindering gender equality and the rights of women and girls in Japan. Before coming here, I asked over 500 members of the SDGs Gender Unit about what I should talk as a prospect for the next year. And they noted in Japan, women's rights are not aligned with the global standard. In order to close the gender gap and push up the Japanese ranking, it is important that Japanese government take all recommendations from CEDAW and also ratify its optional protocol, which would allow individual complaints to the committee. Other members also sent me the issues that Japan needs to tackle, including the issues such as the redress of the survivors of forced sterilization under the eugenic law, legal discrimination against children out of wedlock on the registration system, difficulty of access to contraceptives, including emergency contraception and safe abortion, especially for young women and migrant women workers. They expect the W7 play a catalyst role in helping to improve these issues in Japan. The core principle of SDGs, ensuring that no one left behind, should be also placed at the center of W7, as we heard the panel discussion. We should include the issues of people who are marginalized and vulnerable situations, LGBTQ, indigenous people, people with disabilities, displaced and refugee women, migrant women, women in poverty, aging populations, youth and adolescents, people living in rural areas, and people facing climate crisis. The participation of the Global South should be also ensured. Among the G7 countries, Japan is the only country located in Asia, so women from the Asia and the Pacific region in particular should be encouraged to participate in the next year's discussion. Youth participation will also be welcomed. This is also emphasized in a panel discussion yesterday, and recently JOICEF, my organization, has been promoting youth advocacy. As you know, young people are more open to delivering their views through social media, and their reactions are fast and messages are clear, and they spread fast, leading up to policy changes quickly. Prior to this W7, Youth 7, Y7 had 5 days intensive discussions to make their communique. The power of the youth will surely energize W7. Before closing my remarks, I should mention, and I should take advantage of this opportunity also talking about we are currently looking for funding to help organize W7 in Japan. So please reach out to me if you have any ideas on possible funding opportunities. The next year, we'd like to continue to build on the success of previous W7 discussions, including the issue discussed in Germany. The time differences could be a challenge, so please come to Japan. We would encourage you all to participate in Japanese discussion. We look forward to having you in the next W7, and where feminists gather in Japan and discuss potential solutions to make this world better for all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Fumi Saito. We're really looking forward to go to Japan and to support you the best way possible. So thank you so much for your energy. And the next point on our agenda is a quite bit different to everything else we enjoyed so far, because I'd like to introduce you Lily Krause, and she will give a feminist intervention of a different kind. So, Lily, would you join me on stage? I'm looking in this direction. There you are. There she is. So I leave the stage. Lily, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'm going to share with you 3 poems today. The first one is called You Take and is about anger. The second poem is called, it's about sadness, and it's called Thank You. And the third one is called White Feminism, and that one is about solidarity and sisterhood. You take. You take the fun, I take the work. You take the credit, I do the work. You climb the ladder, I finish the work. You become the leader on my behalf. We give you babies, we give you sex, we give our careers. We give away our time. We give away all that could have been, while you are just fine. You are missing one thing: the power of all of us who have done the work unlike you and had no voice. For centuries, that time lies heavy on our chests, too heavy to turn away. So, let us take the fun while you take the work. Let us take the credit while you do the work. And let us climb the ladder on your behalf. Until we reach a moment of peace and our collective feeling of unease finally disappears, with it our fears. when we stand like humans, not woman nor man, and we feel for each other and feel sorry for the pain. We will see that a man cares. We will take, finally, equal shares in all areas of our lives. Truly yours, your wives. Thank you. Let us be happy. How can we be? Let us be sad. How can we not be? Looking at the world's sorrow with just a blinking eye. Can I just borrow the bird's way to fly? Right over the ocean and back, so that I can thank you for what is and for all that I miss. White feminism. Hey, sisters in the South, now I shall shut my mouth and hear you speak. We were often too weak. It is your turn now. All white feminists vow to hear you out. When you speak about feminist ideas and action, as ours is only a fraction of our common struggle. This poem I shall smuggle onto the world stage, where people will start to care about all the ways in which your perspective makes us rich.
Lily Krause, the applause is yours. Oh my God, how much energizing is this? Thank you so much for engaging with us. Thank you so much. I'm a little bit excited today, you might have noticed. So I forgot to ask you one last question. We wanted to engage with you. So I just do it right now. Describe with one word your hopes for the future regarding gender justice. So let's take a look ahead. One word. We achieve gender justice. What is this all about? You know the games of the rule. Just click, I'm not quite sure on this side or that side, and then enter just 1 to 3 words. The future of gender equality, how will it look like? And we take a look at this cloud at the end of our summit. So now it's time already for a wrap up. So I'd like to welcome 2 more W7 advisors on our stage. And here they are, they're coming in my direction, very good. We have Christina Heinze and René Coupetit. Please have a seat with me. Christine and... I just realized you're both authors. Did you know that? Both of you wrote books, yes. So Christina Heinze is sitting next to me and René Coupetit is next to her. And Christina is the founder of Young Business and Professional Women Germany. And your book is called Women on the Course of Success with Mentoring, How to Get Ahead. And I'm very happy that you're here to share your ideas and experience from the last days. And René, your book is called The Stolen Childhood, right? So just write it down and just order the books, because this is a way to help women directly. Now you work in solidarity tourism and targeting the region of south of Sahara, mainly Congo and Cameroon. You told me you support women and young girls and you teach them the skills for entrepreneurship, so they become role models and find their way out of violence. Thank you so much for coming here. And not just for coming here, but to get engaged with W7 and work intensely for the last months. So once again, thank you so much. Without your support, this would not have been possible. But as I said, this is a session about wrapping up our summit and just taking our time to reflect what did happen. So Christine, your impression from the last 2 days?
Or shall I? That was okay. So, thank you very much for the introduction and for the invitation. The last 2 days have been very thrilling for me, but also I was a little bit surprised. We have been very, very friendly. So, thus I would like to take a comment by the representative from our Youth 7. She said, actually, she's tired of old white men making decisions for all areas of my life. Actually, I'm advocating for women's rights for 30 years. You know, I'm not any longer tired. I'm really angry. So I think it's very important that we have demands here, and it's really time to deliver. And I demand that women have to sit at the decision-making table in the economy, in politics, in peace and security, as we heard. That's what I took on here in the last 2 days, because I'm very much convinced that a fair involvement of women will ensure that we will be ahead of the curve of developments and will not always react on crises and conflicts, what we have seen in the recent past. But we can ensure by involvement of women and also grassroots women to ensure forward-looking and preemptive action. I would like also to highlight one point which is very much to my heart. I'm a senior banker, and also Mr. Meyer yesterday explained that at certain topics we just are at the point where we have a small and historic window of opportunities at the moment, and especially when it comes to ESG and non-financial reporting. I think it can't be that in the corporate world the corporate world is only focusing on the E, on the environment. When it comes to S, the social in the ESG, it is mainly associated with charity projects and philanthropy, and not gender equality and human rights. I also demand that we have to focus on that. And honestly, we have to, I think, maybe be not so friendly anymore, because after 30 years of doing advocacy work for women, I think we can really strongly demand, because not many things have changed, but not everything, and only in small steps, what we have also heard in the last 2 days. Yeah, that's for me the wrap up. It was very exciting to be here, and and I'm happy also to see the diverse base of women, but maybe I have the chance also to maybe comment more on the process, what we had in the W7.
Definitely. But I think you just stressed very well, it is time to deliver. The time is up. It is about time to do something else. René, just taking a look into the future, I mean, we discussed this very shortly this morning. Just taking into account what we heard today and yesterday, and regarding the participation of women on goals and the inclusion and their perspectives from the girls from the Global South, what are your feelings around this issue when you take a look in the future? How do you feel about that?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for your invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be here in Berlin. I think that we can change the life of millions of girls and women with the transformation of the society. School is supposed to protect children. I have a tooth for the people, including children who lost their life yesterday in the United States. The perspective for the Global South is very simple. It's like the life in Europe or in America. We have to ensure that governments have sufficient fiscal space, and they want to contribute and collaborate with civil society is very, very important. Promote the education schooling of young girls. For example, with our organization, we help young girls to go to school in Africa, in Central Africa, in Cameroon, and we help organizations feminists in Republic of Democratic of Congo to do action. We have to create awareness-raising tools to fight against violence. And these tools have to be adapted to the local context. We have to transform the informal economy to the formal, because women empowerment have to be with the creation of the investment and transformation of society depend with the informal or formal level. We have to promote digital learning and encourage young girls to be in the scientific domain, to be doctor, to be teacher. You have to create female model figure. When I'm going to Africa, they tell me that you are my model. And it's the opportunity there in Women 7 for the G7 leaders to create more and more figure leader for all the diversity women in the world. We have to promote women's entrepreneurship, set up structures. My dream is to create a women's center for women and girls in Africa, because they don't have the possibility to have information, sensibilization, and all this work with us. This is like my colleague tell, nothing. We have to support initiatives and projects for the small organizations also. And we have to sensitize about gender equality, preservation of the cultural heritage of indigenous people, Asian, first aid, and climate change. So, if you ask me that, what is the future? I think that the future that we want is to act. And I am in Berlin. I am happy to see other 7 advisors to act. And the action is the solution of the future. The education is the key of the success.
Thank you so much. Action is the key to future, and I think it's very important to understand. I think Fumi underlined this quite well. W7 is not just a 2 days event. It's not even an event for 1 year. It's something which we have to work on constantly to really use the energy we're creating this year and to bring this into the next year. So we're going to this other question, talking about process, and I'm talking to one of the co-chairs of our working group. So Christina, you've been engaged intensely, and we're really thankful for that. So I assume you have a lot of things to say about the process as well.
Yes. First of all, I was very honored to be named, and also my organization were very honored that I was named W7 advisor, and of course also the co-chair of economic empowerment and rights and justice. Actually, we have been a very diverse base of advisors, but interestingly, what I also know from my organization is that nonetheless we are a very diverse base of women. We can very easily agree on the large consensus because we are concerned with very similar topics. So the same was in our working group. Our consensus was pretty fast reached, but the whole content, what we had on our agenda, was the big challenge was to really put the content in clear, brief demands and to ensure accountability. Because we had to consider that politicians do not have so much time to listen. So we had to be brief and precise, and which is very important in the G7 process, to ensure and implement accountability, because at the moment what happens is that every year there's another G7 presidency and things change, and maybe things which have been progressed the year before might not be any longer progressed again. So, and now as a banker, I'm coming to another point. As Mrs. Paus correctly mentioned yesterday, 50% of the G7 population are women. But our Women 7 process was not financed by 50%. We partially only got maybe 1/3 of other processes. So if the governments of the G7 countries really take it seriously, I think they have to dedicate more finance and more funding and more resources to the Women 7. Otherwise, it will be difficult to work. For example, for me, I do it only voluntarily, and most of my members of the working group did it voluntarily. So it's a lot of effort for us, and if very good results shall be produced, we need more resources.
I think this was stated very clearly almost in every panel. I'm just saying it again, put the money in the hands of women and women-led organizations. And this is key to every solution to fight all the problems. So, Reni, maybe last chance to address the G7 leaders. So what would you say to them? What is most important to be done to accomplish what you just so beautifully described when looking ahead into the future?
I just want to say to G7 leaders that everywhere in the world we have crises. We made these recommendations to use these. It is up to them to act quickly for security, climate change, gender equality, health, education, women empowerment, numeric and development of Africa. Why Africa? Because this continent will be the most continent with the young people in the future. They can count on civil society to do so. It's time to deliver. Thank you to all those who work for the success of this summit. I hope that we can see you in 2033 in Japan. We have to include men in the subject because work with women without men is impossible. So G7 leaders, we hope that you are fine to help us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And actually, I'm very curious to understand whether there was something like a special highlight in the last days for you. You get a couple of minutes to think about that, because I was just curious to understand, is it possible to show the last cloud? I mean, I had this question, yes. So we were looking into the future and how would gender equality look like and what it's needed. Well, all are included. Equity is very important. G7 plays a part, parity plays a part, opportunities, and the economy is part of it. And I can see peace. Peace is definitely very important. So thank you so much for engaging with this on this with us. And as I said, well, what was your last most favorite part of the last 2 days? I assume everything, but maybe something in particular you liked very much. Maybe really you're already smiling, so maybe you can start.
I am a writer and I help women and girls to write and to express themselves. So I invite all of you to go to Amazon and read the story of young girls who tell her story, and we fight against violence. So the title of the book is A Stolen Childhood. And I have to finish just one word: equality.
Equality is your last word, and this is definitely important. But I'm not giving up. Is anybody brave enough to say this was the most special part? You can say the food in the background, but it's okay.
I would not say the highlight, but I had a couple of surprises. Because I was surprised that there was so much consensus also among politicians, and that they promised that everything is already done and everything is already ensured, and that we have like feminist foreign policy and that we already have everything. But I think for me, the reality looks a bit different. So that was my surprise. And also my surprise was, as I mentioned earlier, that actually we are still so friendly. So, and when we really want to accomplish our demands and that our demands are put into practice, maybe we should not be any longer so friendly. Maybe we should be really more demanding and really stressing that we demand it. We are 50%.
Yes, I think my favorite moment was literally the moment then as he took our recommendations into his hands. I mean, this was a clear sign, and we're watching him very closely whether he's working on that. And I definitely agree. We have the right to be here. We are fighting constantly for years. And my most favorite moment was the situation I realized I won't be alone in this room. I will be accompanied by you, finally, after years of just working in front of screens. So this was definitely very energizing, and thank you so much. Thank you so much for wrapping up. So I leave you to enjoy the last words I'm saying here from stage, because it's something else I want to highlight. I'm not quite sure where the camera is. There is a camera. Because so much thing has been done during the last days. And you already saw so many of our advisors, you saw so many members of our team, but you have not yet met two other members of our team. So I'd like to ask Laura and Melanie to come on stage, because they need a big applause. So just come next to me. Because it takes all of us, it needs all our energy to come up with the recommendations in the first place, to facilitate this process, to sit here and try not to be too excited when the Chancellor is sitting next to you, and to go through this very intense panels, but also making sure that we have this place in the first place. So that we found a location to host our summit, to feed us literally every day, and to make sure everybody is here on time, and makes lots and millions of calls to just get all those politicians and other stakeholders here. So this is what those people have done. Thank you so much for just sharing the stage with me just this now. And yeah, I just wanted you to know their faces. But you heard the applause, so we're not the only ones here in the room. And I want to ask all the W7 advisors to come here as well, because you met some of them, but not all. And I won't say all of your names, but I want at least the people to see all of our faces. This is what we're saying in our video. We need all our voices, we need all our faces. So please give your faces to us, and please join us here on stage. Yes, and you can make some noise. And the team as well. Everybody who got engaged can come here when I have the chance to. Yes, please, obviously. The team, everybody engaged. It's W7 is this. W7 is not just one person. This is this. And we're evolving each year, and this is how it looks like. Yes, you're allowed to take pictures. And we're growing. So thank you, everyone. Come on, you're in the first row. You're part of this as well. You have to be here. And Monica as well, Madita, you're also part of this. You have to come here. So while the last pictures are being met, I always thank everybody for joining us today. There's the camera. Thank you so much for joining and tuning in today and last day. And please stay tuned, because this is not the last time you see our faces, and this will definitely not be the last time you see or hear our voices and see our faces. And we'll take a closer look what will be the outcome of Elmo. And then, of course, we'll stay connected and we'll work on the joint goals we'll have. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. So, goodbye. So, and we learned this is W.